This worn-out card is fair, like you expired long prior. The youthful security officer grinned, waving the blurred ID card in front of the swarm. The experienced made no answer to the joke. He basically tucked the ancient ID card back into his stash, but the officer had no thought. Fair minutes later, a dark Pentagon SUV would drag up right in front of them, sought unjustifiable. If you accept regard shouldn't be based on appearances, Walter Reed rectified his collar before entering Riverside Bank. That Wednesday morning at 79, the previous Air Force officer moved with think care, his weathered hands selling out slight tremors that he'd learned to disguise through practice developments. The April sunshine felt great on his back after the long winter warming his lean frame through the worn but meticulously pressed naval force jacket he'd possessed for nearly 2 decades. The little town bank was busier than regular to begin with. Of the month meant Social Security checks and retirement. Stores, Walter took his place in line, gesturing courteously to Mrs. Peterson from the library, and youthful Mr. Gaines, who instructed at the tall school. Neither returned his welcoming. With more than quick affirmation, Walter was used to this imperceptibility. Appeared to be the common state of maturing in America. His reason nowadays was straightforward: upgrade his veteran recognizable proof card, which had expired 3 months back. The bank facilitated a VA agent twice month to month for such services, sparing veterans the 40-mile drive to the territorial office. Walter had marked this date on his calendar weeks ago when his turn came. Walter approached the security checkpoint that had been installed final year after a robbery attempt. The youthful officer keeping an eye on the metal finder couldn't have been more than 25, with a new squeezed uniform and name tag. Perusing Officer Brooks, his posture proposed military preparing, but his eyes held the anxious despise of someone who's seen his current position as underneath him. If you don't mind, Brooks demanded. Without looking up from his phone, Walter reached into his internal take and produced his ingenious distinguishing proof card. The plastic was worn at the edges. The photo blurred. The close date clearly visible. Brooks looked at it and snorted. "This is terminated." "Yes," Walter replied calmly. "That's why I'm here nowadays. The VA representative can't let you in with invalid recognizable proof." Brooks interrupted, his voice rising. Sufficient to draw consideration from individuals in line security convention. Walter attempted once more. "If you might fair call the bank director, I'm sure see old-timer," Brookie said, now deliberately boisterous, sufficient for others to hear, waving the ID card between his fingers like a playing card in a magic trick. "This worn-out card is fair, like you lapsed long back." A few individuals in line chuckled anxiously. Somebody muttered about holding up the line. A youthful woman in trade clothing rolled her eyes, checking her observe restlessly. "I've been coming to this bank for a long time," Walter said unobtrusively. Martha at the advanced desk. "Knows me, Jim, Taylor. The supervisor rules are rules." Brooks demanded, his voice infused with the trivial control of his position. No substantial ID, no section. Another Walter felt his chest fix, not from anger, but from a more profound wound of indignity. He had flown undercover missions over domains where American planes officially never went. He had commanded men in circumstances that remained classified decades afterward. He had served when benefit implied give up without public appreciation. And presently, he couldn't even overhaul his distinguishing proof without being mortified. "May I have my ID back, please?" Walter inquired, his voice steady despite the warm rising in his face. Brooks hurled it over the counter carelessly. The little plastic card skidded to the edge where Walter caught it sometime recently. It fell to the floor. "Attempt the DMV," Brooks called after him as Walter turned to take off. "They might have a special senior rebate for replacements." More giggling rippled through the line. Walter tucked the card back into his take and strolled toward the exit with measured steps, his back straight in spite of the weight of a long time and accumulated insults. He gestured politely to the bank greeter as he passed a formality that had been imbued in him since childhood. Exterior. In the bright sunlight, Walter delayed on the steps, momentarily uncertain of his another move. He hadn't expected being turned absent. The bus that had dropped him off wouldn't return for another 3 hours from across the road. An elderly postal worker named Straight to the Point Holloway observed the entire interaction through the bank's glass doors, his eyes limited as Walter emerged alone. His mission clearly unfulfilled. I'm too bad people perusing this far. I'm really disturbed. Why are the people who gambled their lives, so we seem live, in opportunity, treated with such disdain? If you feel the same way I do, sought respect to appear the world that appreciation still exists. Walter stood alone beneath the harsh, early afternoon sun, his hand unconsciously tightening around the take containing his ancient ID card. The walkway bustled with the regular lunch swarm office workers rushing to get sandwiches, mothers with strollers getting a charge out of the pleasant climate, young people loitering with their never-ending discuss of bored restlessness. A gather of youthful men in business casual clothing passed by, one whistling mockingly at the ancient man standing like a statue. Another made a saluting signal that was more parody than regard. Walter imagined not to notice in spite of the fact that decades of tactical awareness had prepared him to miss nothing in his environment over the street. An elderly bloom seller shook her head tragically. Mrs. Abigail Chen had been selling blossoms on this corner for almost 30 along. Time long sufficient to remember when veterans of any war were treated with programmed yielding. Her claim husband had served in Korea, returning with nightmares he never talked about, but that woke them both in the darkest hours until his passing. 15 a long time back, young people nowadays. She mumbled to herself, arranging daisies in a plastic bucket, no respect for history. Walter considered his alternatives. The VA agent would only be at the bank for another 2 hours. His another opportunity wouldn't come for 2 weeks, and his medications required a substantial ID for pickup with his card. Laps, the youthful drug specialist at Valley Drugs, had been increasingly reluctant to fill his prescriptions, though she'd made in special case. Fare this once. The past week, he touched the left side of his chest, where beneath layers of clothing, a few scars mapped missions that had never made the history books in his prime. Walter Reed had been a legend in certain classified circles, the man who had prepared and saved countless discuss-drive extraordinary operations units amid the Cold War. His expertise in nighttime extraction operations had revolutionized. Protect conventions and techniques he spearheaded were still taught in spite of the fact that few knew their route. He had by and by driven 12 high-risk extractions in domains where American strengths were never officially present, recovering not as it were downed pilots, but 2 Insight's assets whose exceptionally presence was denied. For these activities he had received combinations put away in fixed files, medals kept in a wooden box in his modest flat, and the calm respect of those who knew regard that had dwindled as his counterparts passed away, taking their recollections of his service with them presently to the world. He was fair, another elderly man living on a fixed pay, battling with technology, and every so often holding up lines with his gradualness. Walter murmured, altering his posture to ease the hurt in his lower back. Maybe he may discover a police officer who might consent for him at the bank, or perhaps Jim Taylor would step out for lunch and recognize him. A young mother passed by, quickly pulling her curious child absent when the small boy pointed at Walter. "Do not gaze," she hissed, in spite of the fact that boisterous sufficient for Walter to hear, it's not neighborly to gaze at elderly people. Walter nearly grinned at the irony invisible and exhibition simultaneously, the conflicting presence of the aged, his transitory beguilement blurred as he remembered the genuine results of his situation without an overhauled ID. His access to ingenious well-being care benefits would ended up progressively complicated at his age. With his therapeutic history, such complications were not merely inconvenient, but possibly dangerous across the road. Straight to the point, Holloway had seen sufficient. Having wrapped up delivering mail to the businesses along Fundamental Street, he ventured into the shadow of an awning and pulled out his phone. Straight to the point had served in Vietnam too, a long time behind Walter, though in diverse branches. They weren't companions precisely, but they shared the gesture of acknowledgement that passed between those who had worn the uniform when it wasn't prevalent to do so. Frank's gnarled fingers, hardened by both age and early joint pain, explored to a contact seldom utilized but never erased. He pressed the call button and waited through 4 rings sometime recently. A crisp professional voice replied, "Pentagon Special Veterans Undertakings Office. This is Frank Holloway, Ace Sergeant, retired service number 4, 578-3. Straight to the point," said his voice, automatically expecting the formal cadence of his military days. "I require to report an occurrence, including Colonel Walter Reed." The voice on the other end changed unpretentiously. "Walter Reed is on site." "Yes, ma'am. Riverside Bank, corner of Main and Elm, in Bridgewater, being denied service, with outdated ingenious ID." Being Frank's voice, fixed with controlled anger, freely mortified, a brief silence taken after, broken as it were by the sound of computer keys. Verification confirmed. Ace Sergeant Holloway. "Thank you for the report." The call ended without advanced clarification. Straight to the point knew better than to anticipate one. In his experience, the military either did nothing or did precisely what was needed, rarely anything in between, he observed, as Walter at long last moved from his position, walking gradually toward a seat in the small stop adjoining to the bank. The older man sat carefully, arranging himself with the precision characteristic of those who live with constant torment, but denied to acknowledge it. Straight to the point. Delayed, debating whether to approach Walter to offer a few words of support or clarification for what he had done, but something in the other man's bearing, the straight back, the deliberate stillness, the cautious course of action of limbs to propose consolation, or maybe then reveal inconvenience, halted him. Walter Reed had his respect. Straight to the point, wouldn't risk compromising. It encouraged with unwanted sympathy. In step, he continued his postal route, conveying bills, advertisements, and the periodic transcribed letter to a town progressively ignorant of the quiet heroes strolling among them as he worked. He found himself recollecting bits and pieces of data. Approximately, Walter Reed whispered stories from his claim service days, legends that circulated among certain units, almost extraction missions that appeared inconceivable until they succeeded. Walter's ingenious stories remained to a great extent untold, passing into silence as those who knew them firsthand gradually vanished. These touching stories of give up and boldness faded from collective memory, supplanted by stereotypes approximately cantankerous. Ancient men who moved as well, gradually in checkout lines. Frank looked at his observe. It had been 9 minutes since his call. Have you ever witnessed somebody being disrespected because others didn't know their true worth? What would you have done? Exactly 12 minutes after Frank's call, the distinctive sound of a heavy-duty engine broke the late morning calm. A smooth, dark SUV with government plates and a small Pentagon symbol on the entryway turned onto Main Road, moving with purposeful precision. Through the light activity, the vehicle moderated as it drew nearer the bank, drawing inquisitive looks from pedestrians. Government vehicles were uncommon in Bridgewater. Pentagon vehicles were unprecedented. Interior. The bank officer Brooks was getting a charge out of his newfound celebrity, relating his interaction with a confounded ancient vet to several colleagues amid his break. His audience offered perfunctory chuckles at his imitation of Walter's cautious discourse and subtle tremor. "You ought to have seen his face," Brooks was saying, "like I'd stolen his walker or something." The bank's front doors swung open briefly, conceding the sounds of the road, and the unmistakable hammer of a car entryway directly outside. Brooks looked up instinctively, his entertainer's instinct detecting a disruption to his audience's attention through the glass entryways. He seemed to see a black SUV stopped in the fire path, its official government plates clearly visible a minute afterward. The entryways opened again, and 2 military police officers in full-dress uniform entered. Their expressions were professionally neutral as they filtered the campaign, but their posture communicated unambiguous authority. Brooks felt a sudden instinctive unease. 17. A long time of life had taught him to recognize when inconvenience was approaching. In spite of the fact that he couldn't imagine how it related to him, the military police situated themselves on either side of the entryway, and a third figure entered, a man in his early 60s, wearing the full-dress uniform of an discuss force general. 4 silver stars glimmered on each bear, his chest bore columns of ribbons and medals, that indeed Brooks, with his constrained military knowledge, recognized as meaning extraordinary service. The bank fell quiet. Customers and workers alike detected the gravity of the minute, in spite of the fact that none may explain it. The general's eyes cleared the room, once some time recently settling on the front. Doors now opening once more to concede Walter Reed, the more seasoned man, ventured interior, seemingly confused by the sudden appearance of military staff. His eyes widened slightly in acknowledgement as he saw the general, in spite of the fact that he made no move toward him. The common, in any case, strode directly to Walter and rendered a faultless salute. "Colonel Reed," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the quieted bank. "General Michael Harrington. Discuss. Constrain. Special Operations. Command. It's an honor to meet you." Sir Walter returned the salute with military exactness, his hand relentless. To begin with time that day, General Harrington. This is startling. We received word. You are having some difficulty with your identification. Colonel, the common answered. Given your service record, we thought it appropriate to address the matter personally. Brooks felt his mouth go dry. Colonel? The ancient man was a colonel. The general turned, filtering the room, until his look fell on Brooks, still frozen beside the security checkpoint. Are you the officer who denied Colonel Reed entry prior nowadays? All eyes turned to Brooks, whose confronted depleted of colour. I was taking after convention, sir. The ID was lapsed. And convention, the general repeated the word, hanging in the discuss. Let me tell you approximately Colonel Walter Reed's protocol. Officer Brooks, the youthful man supplied week by week Officer Brooks when 23 American aviators were shot down over territory where we formerly had no presence. Colonel Reed's convention was to fly into antagonistic airspace beneath enemy fire, to bring them domestic. When 3 intelligence agents were compromised behind the press window ornament, his convention was to make and actually lead the extraction group that protected them. The general ventured closer to Brooks, his voice bringing down but still capable of being heard in the silent bank, when most men would have written off missions as well perilous or politically complicated. Colonel Reed's protocol was to say, we take off no one behind. Brookie gulped, his earlier bravado completely dissipated. The general turned back to Walter. Colonel, I brought something for you. He motioned, and one of the military police officers stepped forward, carrying a little ruddy velvet box and an envelope, bearing the seal of the Department of Defense. Your service record was surveyed final month as part of our continuous verifiable documentation project. The Common clarified, in the process, certain classified operations were at last declassified. The Secretary of Defense inquired me to convey this personally. Walter acknowledged the box with visible shock. Opening it, he found a newly issued award, the Distinguished Service Cross, with a special presidential quotation. The letter explains the subtle elements, the general continued, but in brief, the Secretary considers you one of the foundational pillars of our cutting-edge, extraordinary operations capabilities. Your preparing conventions for high-risk extractions have saved countless lives and proceed to influence our approaches. Nowadays, the general at that point delivered a new identification card encased in protective plastic. We've moreover taken the liberty of upgrading your ingenious status to reflect your full benefit. Record. Now that certain perspectives have been declassified, this ID has been enhanced to allow you suitable get-to all VA administrations and extraordinary veterans programs. Walter held the unused ID card, its official visualization catching the light, unlike the blurred photo on his expired card. This one bore a current image suggesting that somebody had been keeping track of him all along. The general turned to address the bank at large. Ladies and noble men, you have among you one of the most recognized discuss force officers of the Cold War time. Colonel Reed's activities straightforwardly spared 68 American lives in operations so classified that until as of late, even receiving much appreciated was outlandish. A murmur spread through the swarm bank employees, who had seen Walter for a long time without really seeing him. Presently gazed in disbelief. Clients who had pushed past him in line, or moaned at his careful counting of Walter, looked absent in embarrassment. Officer Brooks stepped forward. Probably, Colonel Reed. I apologize for my behavior prior. I had no thought few individuals do. Walter interrupted discreetly. That was, or maybe the point of classified operations. Oui, his voice held no severity, as it were the simple statement of reality. In that minute, the dignity that had continuously been displayed in his bearing, confused as stiffness or age, got to be unmistakable to everyone watching. The common checked his. Watch, Colonel, if you're amenable, the secretary would appreciate a video call this afternoon. There are a few historical details, as it were. You can give almost the Klagenfurt extraction. Walter gestured a ghost of a grin, crossing his confront at the specify of an operation that had defined his career, but that he had never been able to talk about. I'd be honored, General, as they arranged to take off the bank director at last risen. From his office, drawn by the commotion, he approached Walter with an expanded hand. Colonel Reed, I had no thought if there's anything the bank can do for you, anything at all. Walter shook the offered hand with basic kindness. Thank you, but the common has settled my immediate concern. He held up the modern ID card, though I would still like to make a deposit. Whereas I'm here, the manager personally escorted Walter to a teller window, clearing out Officer Brooks standing alone by his security post, the weight of his activities settling intensely on his shoulders. Exterior. Straight to the point, Holloway watched from over the road, a little grin of satisfaction on his weathered confront. He saluted the common as the bunch exited the bank, accepting a aware gesture in return. Equity, he reflected, didn't always arrive in anticipated ways. Have you ever found that somebody ordinary was really uncommon? How did it change your viewpoint 1 week afterward? A small commitment ceremony took place outside Riverside Bank. No press was invited. No talks were made, but a modest bronze plaque was fastened near the entrance. It studied essentially, dedicated, to Colonel Walter Reed, who lived with honor indeed when the world turned away. The bank supervisor had demanded on the installation, covering the costs personally. Officer Brooks, significantly humbled by the occasions of the previous week, had been reassigned to the bank's operations center over town, a lateral move authoritatively. But everybody understood its importance. Walter's life returned mostly to typical after the Pentagon visit, in spite of the fact that unpretentious changes rippled through his day by day. Intuitive, the pharmacist at Valley Drugs, presently greeted him by his rank. Mrs. Chen spared his favorite blooms, straightforward white carnations. Whenever he passed her stand, the bus driver no longer moaned restlessly. When Walter took additional time boarding, these small kindnesses were advertised not because of the recently uncovered awards or the classified missions presently becoming part of military history books, but because the community had been constrained to see the man they had ignored for so long. The disclosure of Walter's service record had made them address how many other imperceptible seniors carried untold stories behind their weathered faces. Walter himself remained largely unchanged. He proceeded his morning walks through the stop gone by individual veterans at the nursing domestic each Tuesday and brought custom-made treats to the homeless shelter. Once a month his schedule was punctuated, as it were, by periodic secure video, conferences with military historians, recording operations now declassified after decades of hush. He never specified the occurrence at the bank, never abused his recently opened status for uncommon treatment when expressed gratitude toward for his benefit, which happened with increasing recurrence. He basically nodded and diverted the discussion on a crisp Saturday morning. Walter sat on his usual seat in the town square, enjoying the spring daylight. A youthful boy of about 8 drawn nearer, dragging his mother behind him. "Are you the legend, sir?" the child inquired specifically with the unfiltered curiosity of youth. Walter grinned gently. "I'm fair Walter, child." The mother, embarrassed, attempted to drag her child back. "I'm too bad, Colonel Reed. He saw the news story, almost you on the web. No apology required." Walter guaranteed her curiosity is a fine quality in a young man. The boy held on. "My instructor said, you spared parts of individuals no one else could spare. That makes you a legend, right?" Walter considered the child's earnest face. "I was portion of a group, youthful man. We all did our work, but weren't you scared?" The boy squeezed. "Being courageous isn't about not feeling fear," Walter clarified. "It's about doing what needs to be done, despite being anxious." The boy nodded solemnly. preparing this shrewdness as they turned to take off. The mother inclined down to her child. "Is he a saint, mother?" The boy whispered, uproarious sufficient for Walter to hear. "No, child," she answered with a grin. "He's the reason we know how to say thank you." Walter observed them walk away feeling a new warmth spread through his chest. Not pride, he had never sought acknowledgement, but something rarer, the sense that the values he had served might outlast him after all. Frank Holloway showed up taking a situate beside Walter on the seat. The two men sat in comfortable quiet for a few minutes, watching the town go around its Saturday business. "You know, straight to the point," at long last said. "You might have told individuals who you were years back." Walter shook his head slightly. That wasn't the point of serving straight to the point, gestured understanding perfectly. "Still must be pleasant to be seen." "It is," Walter conceded, in spite of the fact that the real victory isn't in being recognized. No, Walter said delicately. "It's in knowing that what we did mattered, whether anybody ever knew around it or not." The two veterans sat together in the morning sunshine, bound by the implicit understanding that true honor never required witnesses. Medals may discolor, ID cards may expire, but genuine honor, the honor of those who lived, battled, and noiselessly persevered, will never blur. Have you ever seen a good person overlooked? Share that story, because each act of thoughtfulness deserves to be listened, subscribed to. So Talus Strength can remind you day by day of what's right indeed when the world has overlooked.